A typical poor bride's headdress had 10 coins sewn onto it.
She would have assiduously swept that dirt floor looking for the coin that had dropped out of her wedding headdress.
Jesus designed his parables to bring the kingdom of God within reach of the common peasant.
Jesus connects with his hearers by referring to details of their lives that would have been very familiar. A shepherd going off in search of a lost sheep. Workers in the marketplace hoping they'll be hired that day so they can bring some money and food home to their family.
This was a man who had a deep connection with the poor because he and his followers were the poor. The more we understand the world of Jesus, the less likely it seems that he stood on top of a mountain and preached down to a crowd of thousands. The real Jesus would have stood on level ground with the people of Galilee. But centuries of tradition portray Jesus as a preacher, delivering sound bites of wisdom. Perhaps that's only half the story. Our image of Jesus' teaching is molded from icons. The serene expression, the raised fingers and thumb in honor of the Holy Trinity. These are not representations of the real Jesus, but reflections of the church that came after him. Are the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain similar creations? We've used archaeology, anthropology, and biblical forensics to try to uncover the way Jesus really taught and how he and his followers moved. We've painted a very different picture. First, the Gospels imply that Jesus was always on the road.
He went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message.
Jesus deliberately takes his message out to the peasant countryside. And I think the reason he's doing that is he wants to galvanize as many peasants as possible.
His core group of followers would enter a village and announce that a great teacher was coming to speak. Then Jesus would make his entrance. His speech was designed to grab the attention of peasants.
If Jesus had delivered long, abstract sermons, they never would have been remembered.
The words he spoke may well have included ones that survived in the gospel sermons.
So much of the teaching of Jesus is very unconventional. For example, blessed are the poor. Really? I mean, we don't think of the poor as blessed.
His delivery was not serene. It was aggressive.
We have one clue in the Gospel of Mark where he begins telling a parable with the simple word, listen.
As Jesus' reputation grew, the size of the crowd would have swelled, but not into the thousands.
Well, when you think how many people would gather around and be able to actually hear Jesus well enough not to lose interest and wander away, I don't suppose you're talking about more than, 30, 40, 50 people, the most.
But the marketplace was not his only venue. Many gospel accounts picture his revolutionary ideas playing out in small village synagogues.
Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues.
The synagogue was very communally oriented in this period. Synagogue is much more democratized. And that's one of the reasons why some lay person coming can say, well, I want to speak, is not all that out of the ordinary, apparently, for synagogue life at this time.
I can very well imagine Jesus entering into a synagogue and raising issues and beginning a conversation with the local elders and with others attending the synagogue.
But there's one more place where Jesus spread his parables. He and his followers traveled with no possessions, so they depended on the hospitality of strangers.
One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him.
In the Gospels, Jesus often discusses his revolutionary ideas over a meal. Such an intimate setting lets Jesus share his insights, his quick wit and charm. Jesus also used the meal to attack social norms. The Gospel of Luke tells the story of a woman bursting in on a meal at which Jesus was a guest.
And a woman who was a sinner began to bathe his feet with her tears and to dry them with her hair.
The woman was most likely a prostitute, and her behavior was a shocking breach of social norms.
And naturally, all the people around the table began to murmur and to say, what if he knew what kind of a person this was, he wouldn't tolerate this sort of thing. He doesn't rebuke her. He doesn't say, you're not welcome, your kisses aren't welcome, your tears aren't welcome. He accepts them as gifts.
So along with the marketplace, the dinner table becomes a way for Jesus to preach.
The last will be first, and the first will exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Love your enemies. Pray for those.
I think if we're to imagine the way Jesus actually communicated his insights, we're better to imagine him doing that around a small, intimate setting rather than out on a hillside preaching at the top of his lungs to a large crowd gathered.
Jesus was a storyteller, a converser, not a lecturer.
Jesus is a good teacher because he asks good questions and because he gets people to think. And in thinking about their lives and in thinking about reality, they change themselves.
A loyal band of disciples followed him.
I think they followed him because they caught his passion. He was passionate about God, and he was passionate about the kingdom of God, which meant a way of living very, very different from the kind of life that existed under the kings and kingdoms of this world.
Crowds of thousands may never have gathered to hear his sermon, but his words, crafted to resonate across time, eventually reach the ears of billions.